I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. It is July 3rd, which is not quite July 4th, but we're going to talk about it. Um, look, I want to thank you for listening to the program. I'm not being aired in Washington this week because usually my show airs on the following day in D.C. I guess I've got special programming planned. You know, I know people have at this stage of the game are having a difficult time knowing what to do with a holiday like Independence Day because there seems to be so much oppression that people are experiencing. So I think I want to address some of that, and we will, we'll kick it around a little bit. I got a couple of other items to talk about as well, but let me start by first reminding people of a speech many people are aware of, and they become aware of it this time of year. It is a speech by Frederick Douglass that was given down the road a piece here, just in Rochester, to a women's group, and it was in like 1852, I guess it was, and what this speech has been titled as is "What to the American Slave is Your Fourth of July," and Frederick Douglass raises a lot of great points, but at its core, he's lamenting. He's lamenting that black people are not included in all of those American creeds that have been touted as as so idealistic and that kind of thing. He basically says, "I'm not included. I'm not part of this," and of course, he was free at the time, but still, he was not. He did not regard himself as included in that Declaration of Independence, even 100 years later. So this is kind of the conflict. Now, here's where I depart from Frederick Douglass, and you've heard me talk about Frederick Douglass in the past. Frederick Douglass wanted to be an American. He wanted that American dream. He wanted to be a piece of that. His biggest complaint, his animosity was towards being, again, excluded from it. That's what Frederick Douglass was about. In fact, he didn't even care if it meant displacing Native people so black people could have lands. I mean, of course, we've talked about Buffalo Soldiers in the past. And, this is kind of his shtick. Yes, he wanted black men to be free. He wanted to end slavery. He was an abolitionist. But he didn't just want freedom. He wanted Americanism. That's what he wanted for the black man, black people. I don't want to make it a sexist thing. So that's what he was. That's what he was fighting for. He wasn't fighting for freedom for freedom's sake. He wanted American freedom, not freedom from America. It wasn't even just freedom from slavery. He wanted what Americans had, what white men had. That's what Frederick Douglass wanted. That's not what we wanted. And this is where I asked the question, because we were included in the Declaration of Independence. Not in a good way. I asked the question, what to the merciless Indian savage is your 4th of July? And in case you don't know why I make that reference and why I'm calling myself, and in fact, those of you who are getting a chance to see this video, I'm wearing my Merciless Indian Savage t-shirt. It actually says below it, Declaration of Independence, because that's where that phrase was coined. We were included by Thomas Jefferson in the foundational document of the United States. In its Declaration of Independence, we were referred to, actually, in a way, kind of twice, but we were called out and insulted by, again, by Thomas Jefferson when he referred to us as merciless Indian savages. And in case you don't know what the passage is, what he was talking about was the fact that the good old King of England, in his words, had endeavored to bring onto the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. The irony of this is just so thick, because we as Native people had experienced the destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions of our own people. Back when it was, the Brits and the Dutch and the Americans, They slaughtered men, women, and children, old men, women, and children, old women. I mean, this is what they did. They took our children and sent them off to residential schools to be beaten, to have the Indian killed in them. So when I see Thomas Jefferson making this reference in your foundational document, the one you're celebrating tomorrow, the one that you are celebrating tomorrow, and the one that Frederick Douglass wanted to be a part of, his complaint again was they were excluded. My complaint is that we were included in such a negative fashion. For the most part, we weren't included in any of the constitutional issues, but we were included in this document. And I think it's important that people realize from day one of American independence, actually before they were independent, just the day they declared it, they were already throwing us under the bus. And keep in mind, so what was this Declaration of Independence for? I mean, you could argue, okay, well, it had to happen. You have to do this formal declaration to start that ball rolling. But keep in mind, the language that he said, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. This was a lobbying effort. This was PR. He was telling the rest of the world what colonists were facing. Merciless Indian savages whose warfare was just a destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And of course, he blamed the king for putting us in conflict with colonists. Now, keep in mind, the colonists were doing the same thing. They were we were being lobbied from both sides, both the colonists and the throne and the UK. They were both trying to get us involved. In fact, from day one, when the Brits were fighting the French, I mean, in every part of this colonial experience, Native people were being drawn in and pitted in their conflicts. And then we get called the savages. And of course, the irony in this quote, which is never taught in school, by the way. I mean, you really got to look for this, because I guarantee all those schools down in Long Island who claim they want to honor Native people, you aren't teaching this stuff. Because if you were, just think about that. So if you were teaching this stuff, where your founding father, Thomas Jefferson, said we were merciless Indian savages whose warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. That's what you want for your mascot? Somebody who kills babies and women and children and and old men? That's what your second president, the guy who wrote this document, declared your independence on your behalf. That's what he said. And you want to tell me that you're honoring us, but you won't tell this truth? Oh, yeah, we think Native people represent the noble savage. Well, really? That's not what your Declaration of Independence said. It didn't say noble savage. It said merciless Indian savage. Yeah, so you were great warriors. Really? That's not what your Declaration of Independence said. It didn't say anything about honoring us or our chiefs or any of the stuff that you've conflated to be what you believe we represented. It ain't what your founding fathers were saying. And not just here in its original founding document. Throughout history. The whole history of white supremacy and, not only towards black people, but towards Native people. And I got to say, again, bringing up, Frederick Douglass, the views that black people had towards their existence on this continent was different than the views that we had. And I'm not throwing black people under a bus by any means. Look, I don't envy, and I'm not wishing that I had their lives. But I think people have to understand there were distinctions between the treatment of Native people and the treatment of black people. Even when there was also there was commonality in the way we were mistreated. So yes, there was both. I just think that people have to understand that. So when you get a chance to listen to James Earl Jones or one of the great other black orators speak out and talk and reiterate and speak out this Frederick Douglass speech, this famous speech of his, I just want you to consider some things. I mean, look, we talked about Beyonce and her Buffalo Soldiers shirt last week. Maybe people should understand what that means. I mean, what Ta-Nehisi Coates, he said it, right? When he was asked in an interview about the oppressed becoming the oppressor, and he was basically talking about what Israel's been doing to Gaza, he he was quoted as saying his own ancestors who fought in the Union Army to end slavery would stay with that Union Army and stay with the U.S. military and be cruel and oppressive to Native people. So he saw in his own people the same thing. Once the oppressed get a certain amount of power and a right to oppress others, they do. He didn't say he liked it. I mean, he wasn't justifying it. He was just acknowledging it as a matter of fact. Bob Marley's song "Buffalo Soldiers" is sarcasm. It is not meant to be interpreted as endearing to those black men who became Buffalo Soldiers. When he says fighting for America, he's being sarcastic. It's just unfortunate that somebody like Beyonce knows just doesn't know. I mean, and hopefully she does that. She does know now. I mean, I don't know. I don't expect any, any correction, thrown out by her. But, look, there are things that are done through. Remember when the Gap issued those shirts that said "Manifest Destiny"? I don't know. Were they clues to what that meant? Because we weren't. We're not clueless about what Buffalo Soldiers were, and we're not clueless about what's in the Declaration of Independence. So, I think it's important that people realize history matters. That's what my whole show was about last week. Talking about, again, Beyonce and others. If we don't know this history, that's how the whole mascot thing gets taken out of context. Because you get to reinvent your opinion of who we are. That's what's happened with this. I'm not a descendant of a once proud people. I am those people. We still exist. And I think it's important for people to realize that you can't treat us as if we had a people that once existed, that exists no more, and because you can assert some sort of dominance over that history, not over the people necessarily, but over the people too, that you get to change history. You get to rewrite it all. Let's be clear. Thomas Jefferson was a white supremacist, just like all the rest of them. He once wrote a letter, when he was the president, to Henry Harrison, who would later become a president, but Henry Harrison, who was the governor of Indiana Territory. He wrote a letter, and what he was telling this governor of Indiana Territory was that they needed to encourage and convince the good businessmen of that area to not make a bunch of money off Native people. Now, he wasn't saying it to be kind. No. Sell at cost, but get them in debt. Run up their debt. Give them credit, and when they reach a debt that they can't pay, they'll lop off that debt with their lands. That's how we get it. That's how we take it. I mean, when I think about what the whole housing crisis, the mortgage crisis was, the whole Fannie Mae and all these underwater mortgages, and all the shame, all the outrage. That was a part of your plan. That was a strategy by Thomas Jefferson to displace Native people. Yeah, give them a bunch of pots and pans. Give them some metal stuff. They don't do that metal thing very well. Give them some pots and pans and some knives. Don't give them any guns. Yeah, give them some stuff at cost. And when they can't pay you back, you'll get their land. They'll lop off that debt with their land. That's what Thomas Jefferson, he was advocating bankrupting us to screw us out of our land. That's the enlightened one, Thomas Jefferson. Yeah. So what is the 4th of July to us? There was no independence. I talk oftentimes about this line in the Declaration, but there's another line in the Declaration of Independence that is much more significant as to why the colonists wanted to claim independence. And it had to do. There's a line in there, and I'm not going to quote it. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase, where he talks about the fact that the king would not allow an influx. Here, consider this one: an influx of immigration. He was denying an influx of immigration so the colonists could grow out their population and take more land. See, they didn't really care about the immigrants. They wanted to take more land. But the justification by Thomas Jefferson and others, and Thomas Jefferson wrote the damn thing, was by denying immigration, the king was denying their right to expand their population, expand their land holdings, and expand. So that was really what this was all about. And the King of England had issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763 that said, no, you don't cross this line. We don't need to go to war. We don't even know how many native nations there are. So don't do that. That's what the king was saying. And that Royal Proclamation is still an issue. Frankly, it went all the way up into Canada. It's still an issue that our guys are fighting with much of the land back movement. So, I mean, you have to understand history. And the problem is it won't be taught. And for those schools who wanted to claim our identity for your mascots, yet absolutely refuse to teach any history, that's just pathetic. That's just pathetic. And I am going to shift gears a little bit on that subject, because you have a paper down there and called the New York Post, which is just the worst. I mean, I've never wanted to say, man, I just wish all the print media would go out of business. But if this one did, nobody would miss anything. Well, I take it back. The right would. They are such right-wing hacks at the New York Post. They ran a story this week, and I don't know if you saw it, but it was about Connecticut, one of the schools out there in Long Island. And what they said was that the New York State Education Department's Board of Regents had done an about-face regarding Connecticut's name, their mascot, which has been the Thunderbirds. And they said, we're going to allow them to keep T-Birds if they agree to drop their lawsuit, which they've already lost anyway. I mean, there's no real threat in their legal action. It's just wasting more money, both from the state and from the school district. The problem with the story is it's just flat out false. For one thing, the Board of Regents doesn't enforce the regulations of the Education Department. They just approved they voted unanimously on this ban. They also voted unanimously on the regulations, which included banning any names or images that are derivative or hold vestiges of the native mascot. So, no, T-Birds doesn't fly. No pun intended. No, T-Birds isn't going to work. But here's the thing that Connecticut tried to do. They tried to say, oh, we never used a native reference in our use of Thunderbirds. There was never a native reference. What do you mean there was never a native reference? I mean, I don't know how many people have ever heard of the expression Thunderbirds, but if you've ever heard that expression, there's no way that you could not have associated with some sort of native culture. And now, it's not even part of mine. I'm Haudenosaunee. I'm Gunyagahaga. We don't do the whole Thunderbird thing, but others did. I don't even know if the nations on Long Island did. I mean, and again, I'm not throwing you under a bus here, but I just know that it's not a part of my culture. But I know that it's a part of many nations, especially as you go out west, northwest, southwest, all of it. And in fact, if you just Google it, you will see that they talk about this imaginary or fictitious bird that controls weather, thunder, has lightning bolts in its talons. These are the stories, right? I mean, it's not necessarily just a phoenix or an eagle. It is a mythological bird that has been a part of native culture. And look, it's metaphor. I mean, it's the idea that you have a being in the sky that controls weather, and of course, they associate it with the Thunderbird. So, And here's the crazy part about this school in Long Island. They knew that it was Native related because in their earlier filings with this, their initial lawsuit, they tried to say, well, we were very respectful to the Native culture. They made the acknowledgement that they knew that what it was, but now they're trying to say it has nothing to do with Native people. Never did. It was never a Native reference in their use of Thunderbirds. So all the folks from NYSED, the New York State Education Department, said, all they said was, well, if you want to make that argument, go ahead and make the argument. If you can prove, which you can't, that your use of Thunderbirds never had any reference, even though that's not what you said in your earlier filings. If you want to make that case, make the case. And look, we'll consider it. But here's what they meant by we'll consider it. First, you got to prove that what you filed earlier wasn't true, that you misspoke, and that your use of Thunderbirds has no connection to Native culture or Native mythology. None whatsoever. You got to prove that, which they can't. Then if you have any success with that, I've told people that NYSED put together an Indigenous Mascot Advisory Council. Now, how do I know this? Because I'm on it. And in fact, I'm probably one of the more foremost involved members of that council. When I saw this article in the New York Post, the first thing I did was send two text messages, one to the chief of staff of the commissioner and one to the commissioner of education. I said, what are you guys doing to me here? I mean, are you really approving T-birds for Connecticut? And they said, or is this just another, fictitious story in that rag of a newspaper called the New York Post? And it said, well, it's a rag. So they said, no, it's simply not true. It has not been approved. And the Board of Regents has nothing to do with it anyway. And they certainly was, what this one school board member who's leaving the board said was, we made a deal that if we, the Board of Regents would allow us to keep T-birds if we agreed to drop our lawsuit. That's not even the case. That's not even the case. They said they wanted to drop their lawsuit. In fact, this was one of the schools who said they were getting rid of it and that they needed an extension. And they applied and they actually got an extension. But now you got people saying, wow, wait, no, we're not going to change the name. So now you got to wonder, how much are they going back on their word? Native people had this happen a few times where people made promises that they never kept. Well, this is another one. So there was no deal made. There was no agreement by the Board of Regents or the Education Department to say, well, if you drop your lawsuit, we'll let you keep T-birds. No, it's not the case. And of course, again, keep in mind, this school is saying their use of Thunderbirds and T-birds has nothing to do with Native people. I don't know what they're saying it is. I don't know. They said, oh, there was a car called the Thunderbird. Yeah, there was. But that was named after Native people. Oh, there was an airplane called the Thunderbird. Yeah, that was also Native references. And I don't know, maybe they're talking about John Travolta in Greece. Weren't they called the Thunderbirds or the T-birds or something like that? Their little boy band in Greece. I don't know, but it is an absurd claim that they're making, one that they simply cannot prove. And at the end of the day, even if they think they've made their case, it's got to go by us. And that's what Dr. Rosa, I was on the phone with her. She says, no, whatever is being proposed here, it's got to be approved by the Indigenous Mascot Advisory Council. And we aren't going to approve this. So again, the New York Post runs with a rag of a story just to kind of hype up and get the right all jazzed up again. And it's crap. I mean, it's just crap. And I bring this up, and I realize that our WBAI listeners are not big devourers or consumers of the New York Post. But look, those headlines go everywhere, and they're all over social media. And look, and I responded. I flat out called the story false, and I called out the Post, and both in social media and directly on their page. What they printed was just simply not true. And they didn't get they got no quotes or statements from NYSED or anybody on the Board of Regents. All they were going with was this story spun up by this exiting Board of Education member from Connecticut. So So this is her last ditch effort to save their mascot. And again, it is so pathetic. And and one of the statements that they said in the article is that, well, the Board of Regents said, and what did they say? How did they say it? Well, for 4 years it was derogatory, and now it's not. No, you still don't get it. Yeah, look, white people, I got to talk to you. We are not necessarily claiming that every name that you've used or every image that you use is derogatory. Some certainly are. The buffoonish ones, the racial slurs, raiders, redskins, savages. Yeah, like your president called us. Yeah, those are derogatory. But what we're saying about you using us for your amusement as mascots, it's that is offensive. It's the whole idea that you're using us for your amusement. And of course, in the process, you're just mocking us. You've got, white boys out there dancing, making up Indian dances. You've got costumes, you got feathers, more feathers you know, than a chicken farm. I mean, this is what you do. You've mocked Native people, and you've misrepresented everything about us. Everything about us. And now you're even claiming that your use of Thunderbirds had nothing to do with us. So now you're even erasing that? Just like the guys over there at Massapequa. You used a Hollywood image for your mascot. Full Plains Indian headdress. What does that possibly have to do with your so-called indigenous history, the history of your region? It has nothing to do with it. But you don't care. I mean, there is no integrity in this. And I've made all the cases. I'm not going to bring up the same stuff that I bring up every week when I talk about this. But, the crazy part is you can't even see it. And I've had people, that I've confronted on social media and I got to admit, I do get a little bit encouraged when I get to have a discussion with some moron on social media. I love embarrassing these folks because the thing about being stupid is you likely don't know you're stupid. And the worst thing is an arrogant stupid person. I'm not talking about Donald Trump necessarily, but we can include him in that. The arrogance that coincides with stupidity and ignorance is, I mean, not only is it laughable because you see just the ridiculous things that get said and done, but you can't change those people. So when I engage somebody, whether it's on social media or directly, again, in the comment section of the New York Post, when I engage with somebody, I'm not doing it to try to convince the person that I'm necessarily individually engaged with. I want everybody else to see this. I want people to witness it. Witness, because it only takes me usually about 2 or 3 exchanges before somebody's going to say something really overtly racist. And again, so what's overtly racist? Well, let's go right back to the beginning. Thomas Jefferson calling us merciless Indian savages and then lying about our mode of warfare when it's always been the Europeans that were the most savage and destructive and heinous. I mean, look, you can go through history. Everything from Lord Jeffrey Amherst recommending handing out disease blankets to kill us through what has to be the first recorded use of germ warfare. I mean, that's pretty low. And and everybody can condemn it now, but that's how you cleared a lot of Native people. That's how you depopulated the countryside. So I mean, I go through this stuff and I explain history because I think it's not that you have a right to know, but it's right that you know it. You should understand what your country has done. And it's not enough to say, well, yeah, we ended slavery, and passed the Civil Rights Act. Look, for one thing, that didn't fix anything. That was like an attempt going forward to make some changes. but it certainly didn't have anything to do with us. And I've talked about everything from your Citizenship Act and all this other stuff. I mean, your 14th Amendment didn't apply to us. Your Commerce Clause doesn't apply to us. Your Constitution doesn't apply to us. We weren't even counted. And then, out of nowhere, you come up with this concept that we were somehow now going to be regarded as wards of the federal government. No legal basis for it. You just declare it, like everything else the United States does. Look, I'm not ready to make a full announcement, but we're probably about a week away from releasing or at least finishing up and having a finished product in the documentary that I've been working on for most of the year. Actually, it's been a bit of a long process, certainly since last fall, and we're calling it The Long Hope, and that name comes from it comes from a white guy, a former Interior Department secretary, or head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, whatever you want to call it, a guy by the name of John Collier. He served in that capacity under FDR, but he was always considered a little bit too close and compassionate and understanding of the Native situation. So he was oftentimes condemned and frankly didn't last that long in that job, I guess. But he wrote a book, and the subtitle of it was The Long Hope. And what he said in one of the statements in that book was that the Native people had a different reverence for life. And that, and he wrote this thing right after the dropping of the bomb, in that era. So we're talking about the early 50s. And so his concern about man's destructive nature was oftentimes highlighted by his understanding that Native people, and that many Native people still had that reverence for life, even while others seemed to have lost it. So when he referred to the long hope that we've always had was that we would remain free and that we would fight for and defend our free and independent existence. So that's the name of the film. I'm hoping to go out and about with it. I don't know. We might do some of the film festival stuff. I'm not sure. But we're gonna get it out there. Many of you know that I used to screen films right there in New York. I've gone out to Long Island and screened a few films, none of which were mine, and this one I'm a part of. So I look forward to doing that, and it addresses many of the things that I talk about. But I'm hoping as more people become aware. I mean, look, here's the thing about the whole mascot issue, and I got to jump back at that. Honestly, once the news started breaking about all of the unmarked graves that were being discovered on the Canadian side, they even started looking on the U.S. side. And there's going to be far more on the U.S. side than there was on the Canadian side. But once those numbers started coming in, hundreds and then thousands, and now close to 10, it's over 10,000. Oh, over 10,000 sites have been identified as potential grave sites. Most of them unmarked graves on the Canadian side. Now, the U.S. side had 4 times more residential schools than the Canadian side did. And it was all the same policy. It was all kill the Indian, save the man, right? But I thought when that news started breaking that this mascot debate would be over. I thought, how can white people see these news clips, see the Pope himself try to backtrack away from what happened at these residential schools? Look, forget about Joe Biden's apology or even Kathy Hochul's apology a couple of weeks back. Forget that crap, because I'm not one about, I don't accept the apology, because you can't say you're sorry and take no action to correct the harm that was done. And in the United States, they don't even want to determine what the harm was. Deb Haaland, Native Secretary of the Interior, she didn't even want to assess the harm. She chose rather, and I've mentioned this before, I'm going to bring it up again, rather than try to make any assessment on the harm and the damages that were committed to Native people, against Native people during this era, 150 years in total, but even the last 100 years of residential schools, she decided, well, let's just look at how much money the federal government spent on them. So she did a calculation only over the last 100 years of residential schools being in existence and determined that adjusted for inflation, the United States has spent $23.3 billion in the commission of this genocide. And she believed that that was the number that had to be used as an equivalent for solving the problem. I don't know in what world you determine what is just by calculating how much it costs to commit a crime rather than the adverse effects of that crime. I don't know. I don't know what world you do that in. Certainly, that's not what chemical companies or anybody who's ever done anything that where they faced any kind of liability. I mean, it's like telling somebody. It's like telling the guy who ran over those people in Virginia, ran those people down with his Camaro, saying, "Well, how much did it cost you? How much was your car? Did your car cost? And we're going to assess your fines based on that. Forget about who you killed and who you injured. We just want to know how much it cost to commit the crime." Yeah, that's what Deb Haaland, the native lady, Interior Secretary, broke that glass ceiling. Well, she might have got stuck up on that glass ceiling, but she didn't break nothing. She didn't break a damn thing. So, tomorrow, I know there's going to be a lot of conversation. Yeah, Frederick Douglass's name will come up, and in his speech about to what to an American slave is the 4th of July. And there will be a lot of people discussing the state of the United States in this 1 year before they reach a milestone. What is it? Is it 250 years? Is that what it is? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So there will be, but you know what? People are going to celebrate. They're going to do their fireworks. They're going to, and apparently China's going to pay all those tariffs on those fireworks. Not. So, I mean, everybody's going to celebrate their day, their holiday. I won't be. I'm not celebrating independence. I'm not celebrating the United States. I'm not celebrating the Declaration of Independence because it's not even taught. It's not a document that Americans are proud enough over to even teach it in school. They don't. They reduce the entire Revolutionary War to taxation without representation. Really? That's what you've done? Oh, yeah, well, the king was forcing people to open their homes up to lodge their soldiers. Really? That's what you're trying to make this whole deadly encounter over? And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the national anthem. We talked about that. Reggie actually read the excerpt from it last week or a couple of weeks ago. The third verse, that is. The third verse where it is so clear that the anger and hostility and the gall that that any black man would have in looking to a country like the United Kingdom that was already opposing slavery. In fact, keep in mind, the United States was the last civilized country to have a slave industry. To have a slave industry. So yes, there were the formerly enslaved who, frankly, supported the United Kingdom in that conflict because they were opposed to slavery, and in the third verse of the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, there's literally a reference to washing away their footsteps with their own blood. That's the line. I mean, that's how brutal the colonists were towards anybody who didn't see things exactly their way. And look, Does that seem outrageous? Well, it shouldn't, because that's what you see today. That is what exists today in the United States. There is such an animosity that has been built up against immigrant population. How crazy is it that one of the complaints submitted to the candid world in 1776 was the king of England not allowing immigrant populations to populate the United States in the colonies? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But of course, there was a reason. And in fact, here's the crazy part. The fact that Trump has backtracked a little bit on the immigration thing because his benefactor said, "Hey, you're costing us money. Who's going to pick our crops? Who's going to work our meat packing plants? Who's going to work all of these jobs that we can't get white people to serve it, to do? We can't. You can't cut off our. Of course, we're using illegal or undocumented workers. Illegal, undocumented workers. We can pay them less because they can't complain about the conditions that we force them to work under. This is our out. This is our loophole. We utilize this immigrant population, this undocumented immigrant population, to make money. Because we can't ship every job overseas. So, I mean, when you consider all this stuff, and this is a country that tries to pride itself on rule of law, on equality, justice for all. Are you freaking kidding me? The documentary, our documentary, The Long Hope, it busts that myth. We talk about, as you can imagine, I talk about the three legal doctrines that are not laws, but they lay a foundation for them to create laws upon them. But the legal doctrines themselves are just purely authoritarian rule. I mean, there's nothing in the doctrine of discovery, the trust doctrine, or the plenary powers doctrine that would hold up to any scrutiny if it were actually laws. If they were actual laws, you could challenge them in court. But because they're only legal theory that laws have been built upon, it's much more difficult. You cannot actually challenge a legal theory, a legal doctrine. You can only challenge if a law has been built upon that, and you could argue that it's unconstitutional that it was built upon that. But that's a tough one. That's a tough one because once they passed the plenary powers, and this was done in like 1871 during an Appropriations Act, once they codified the plenary powers doctrine, all of a sudden, constitutionality about anything done to Native people went out the window. It was no longer even challengeable. It was an exclusive power of Congress, and it was developed exclusively against Native people. So, when I ask, what to the merciless Indian savage is your 4th of July? That's what it is. It's just the 4th of a lie. It's a lie. Every part of it, every part of that document. I challenge you to read through the Declaration of Independence. I challenge you to read through that and look at how many of the very things that Thomas Jefferson was complaining about exist today under the Trump administration. And frankly, has existed before the Trump administration. I mean, due process? I mean, you've literally got Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others saying, well, if somebody's here illegally, they are entitled to due process. That's not what the law says. That's not what your Declaration of Independence said. It complained about the lack of due process. Right from day one. So no, it's all hypocrisy. It was all, the whole Declaration of Independence was a publicity scam. It was to get other countries to look down their noses at the United Kingdom, at Great Britain. Say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that stuff. They don't, and Frederick Douglass is right. There's no mention of slavery. There's not one mention of a black man in the Declaration of Independence. And then when they would adopt a constitution, they would look at the black folks as only 3/5 of a person, but not citizens. So all of their rhetoric about equality and justice, no, a black person was only being counted at 3/5 of a person for white benefit. Let me explain that. This was the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. Constitution was not even giving black people 3/5 of the right of a white man. It was saying that their bodies could be counted as 3/5 of a white person for congressional representation. That way, all those white folks down south could have a disproportionate amount of power in the federal government based on how many slaves they had. This, I mean, when people look at that 3/5 compromise, they say, well, yeah, black people were only counted as 3/5 of a person. No, they weren't. They weren't really being counted as persons. They were only being counted for enumeration of congressional representation and possibly taxation. They weren't granted 3/5 of the right of a human being. No, no. And you know what? This is where where I stop paralleling with somebody like Frederick Douglass. Because Frederick Douglass, he fully embraced the U.S. Constitution. He just didn't like the idea that black people weren't being counted properly, and they weren't being afforded the same luxuries as white people. He wasn't interested in justice for all. In fact, he was a big advocate about joining up. I mean, literally, he almost like forebode or foreshadowed the Buffalo Soldiers. Allow us to help you rid the land of the native people. That's literally what some of the language that Frederick Douglass used. We can help you tame this land. We just want some. We just want some. So, yeah, I realize tomorrow's a holiday. And I usually come across as somebody bashing holidays because I think so many of U.S. holidays are based on some level of injustice and some level of oppression. Including, Trump's parade, Flag Day parade. That's all about war. This was all about declaring a war. So much of what the United States celebrates as their holidays are based on violence. And all I'm saying to you folks is, especially those of you who are like just digging in on the mascot issue, you're not honoring us with using us for your mascots. Your people never, ever embraced us as noble figures. Yeah, it was romanticized to some extent. I mean, it was always this sense, again, that question between the expression, the only good Indian's a dead Indian. The debate isn't, I mean, that was a statement. Philip Sheridan, his statue stands at the Capitol in Albany, by the way. The only good Indian's a dead Indian. The question is, were they suggesting that we were only good if we were dead, or that only the good ones were now dead? Because you take somebody like L. Frank Baum, he eulogized Sitting Bull, basically called him this, the last of the noble savage, essentially. Praised him, even praised his vengeance as just vengeance, because of having been wronged by white folks. He praised, he thought Sitting Bull was great. He was the last of that noble kingsman. So, L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, his idea that the only good Indian is a dead Indian is that all the good ones had died or were murdered. Not that the only way to make us good was to kill us. Because although he did advocate that, he advocated the extermination of Native people, not to make us good Indians, but just to rid themselves of any security issues that might exist because of how mistreated we had been. So, tomorrow is the 4th of July. And yeah, there'll be fireworks. And the question will be, what do Native people do with that holiday? I won't be celebrating it. But here's what I ask of you. And I ask this of you with every show. WBAI and WPFW, but I'm only on in New York this week. WBAI needs your support. My show needs your support, not because any donations you make to WBAI come to me, but I need to have a Reggie Johnson in studio. We need to have a studio. Yeah, I'm broadcasting from my own little studio here in the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, but this audio has to go somewhere. So we need you to support the station for our tower rental, for our transmitter fees, to cover the bare bones skeleton staff that we have. So I ask that you support WBI by going to you can go to the website that has been set up not just for the buddy system, not just for the BAI buddies, but you can make any donation there, and that's buddy buddy.wbai.org, or call 1-833-922-4692. That's 1-833-922-4692. And look, if you get an answering machine, if you get voicemail, just leave your name and number, and somebody will get back to you immediately. I mean, I would love to think that anytime I give that number out, that everybody starts to call all at once. That may or may not happen, but we do need you to support this station, and I need you to do it in the name of Resistance Radio for two reasons. One, to demonstrate your support for hearing something that you're not hearing anywhere else. And like I said, I know that there are other Native voices out there on radio, on podcasts. There's any number of Native voices you can hear. But I guarantee there are few who are taking the positions that I'm taking and offering you this kind of candid counter-narrative to everything else that you've heard. Yeah, I have a different view on just about everything. But when you hear it, you'll find that it makes sense. You'll find that it makes sense what I'm talking about, what I'm saying. Because I base my conversation on facts, not just opinions. When I hear people say about the mascot issue, well, anybody can be offended over anything they want if they choose to be. No. I'm not choosing to be offended. You are using my people, my culture, our images, or some reference to us for your amusement. And you don't do it to anybody else. I always come back to the same thing. Show me your black mascot. Show me your Jewish mascot. Yeah, don't give me the whole Huguenots thing or Dutchman or whatever else. For one thing, to be clear, you're not Native. You are white folks using a people that you are not a part of for your entertainment. I'm saying try that with a black man. Try that with a black mascot. Just try it. We'll see how that works out. Look, I want to thank you for listening. I am John Kane. This is Resistance Radio. Enjoy your holiday. Just be careful what you celebrate. I'm John Kane. This is Resistance Radio. We'll see you next week. Yahweh.